First thing we are doing is we are tracing through the sample and finding the first occurrence of call EAX. Once we have found that, we can extract a pointer to the location where the sample is self-modifying itself. We are setting a breakpoint to this location, and once the breakpoint is hit, we are in the function which is resolving the call to allocate virtual memory. The call EAX here in the middle of the screen is resolving the API call to allocate virtual memory, and the return at the end of the function is then finally calling it. The sample is using allocate virtual memory to allocate certain buffers which are used during the unpacking process. So these buffers are filled with code which is used for self-modification and a couple of other unpacking routines, plus at the end the final malware payload. So we can just set a breakpoint to allocate virtual memory, and then later, after the buffer was allocated, a hardware breakpoint which breaks if the buffer is used. Until this point, most of the samples are the same. They start to differentiate after this point, and it depends on the payload and on the features which are enabled in the packer. If there are 2, 3, 4 or more buffers which are used before you can see the final payload. So at this point you have to start to become very careful with the unpacking script and verify the results step by step before you are proceeding. In this sample it takes, for example, 3 iterations to come to the final payload. And as mentioned, in between we have a couple of unpacking and self-modifying functions. Here, for example, you can see how it unpacks the next stage and jumps to it via return. So we can redo these steps until we have reached the point where the allocated memory is filled with the final payload. So in most of the samples, this is already the point where you can usually dump the original payload to disk. But in this case, it is a little bit more complex. It is injecting the payload into itself, and it is overwriting the own PE image in memory with the payload. So if we want to follow this process too, we need a couple of further steps, which you can see now. Okay, so this is the point where it is overwriting the original PE image in memory. So it is doing some additional fixing, but we can now trace over until we have reached the jump EDX, which is then finally jumping into the unpacked payload.